Can I just introduce it by saying that I don't think, in my experience, I've ever had so many comments and, if you like, criticisms of the consultation procedures. Much of the consultation is done by the applicants, and that's a standard across the country in all sorts of places. And a number of people have made a comment about that. Can I just say, public, that we do not, as committee members, consider the consultation to be a referendum. Thank you, Councillor Govindia, for giving me that word. A referendum on the applications. We make a judgment on the applications as they stand, and many of us personally, probably all of us, have been involved in collecting signatures on petitions in our time and considering them. So be reassured that we will consider the petitions in a true manner and recognise that two sides of almost every coin, and that's all there is to it. We will listen to the debate and the discussion and the advice from the officers and take into account the consultation, but only take into account and decide accordingly. Just thought I wanted to make that remark. Councillor Sir Jules is a ward councillor for the next door ward. It's my ward as well, so I should have 5 minutes too. But we'll make up for that in the discussion and debate. Councillor Sir Jules and also Councillor Coakley and Councillor Lee have written in a piece that I'm going to ask the clerk to read as well. So you've got 2.5 minutes, 5:30, to give us your view, Councillor Sir Jules.
Perfect, and thank you for letting me speak tonight. I know it's not normal practice since I don't actually sit in the ward, but as you know, the Glassmill will have a huge impact on residents of St Mary's, which I represent, and beyond. And I've also been asked by residents in Battersea Park ward to speak on their behalf tonight. As you'll be all aware, there's been unprecedented public opposition to the scheme. There's been over almost 2,000 people submitted objections on the planning website. Over 5,000 signed a petition organised by a local campaigner, Rob McGibbon. At the latest count, over 600 people signed the petition that I organised. The proposals go against so many of the council's local plan policies, as well as the London plan policy and the NPPF. It'd make a total mockery of the council's policies if you vote for this application and go against an officer's recommendation to refuse. Height, scale and massing are clearly big issues with this project, but it goes beyond that. The Glassmill is quite simply the wrong building for the wrong site. Battersea's local heritage is at risk. The tower would dominate the skyline. The GLA noted that the proposal would result in harm to heritage assets, including Albert Bridge, Battersea Park, and a number of conversation areas, both in Battersea and Chelsea. There are also concerns about potential structural damage to Battersea Bridge, a Grade 2 listed asset, as a result of the construction process. Residents have also expressed significant concerns over loss of daylight and sunlight on neighbouring properties, as well as overshadowing and privacy concerns. I would also argue there's insufficient public realm improvements. The improvements to the Thames path are minimal and lack ambition. Partly, this is a reflection that it's a very constrained site and the building fills up most of the available footprint. Given it's a small site with significant and unresolved access constraints, there's likely to be significant disruption to the local community doing building works from construction traffic and in an area which is already heavily congested and where there have been fatal road accidents in recent years. The planning application is significantly lacking in its construction management plan, with few details on how the building works will actually be managed on this constrained site. I would assume that in principle, most of us in this room support the idea of building more affordable housing. I think it should be noted that the housing proposed here for social rent is stated to be subject to viability, There's no guarantee that the level of affordable housing will actually be provided, and there's no indication that a registered provider has actually been identified to purchase it. Residents have also raised concerns about the financial viability of the scheme. I think as taxpayers is something we should all care about. I can't have been the only one left scratching my head when it was announced that the initial scheme would be reduced in height by 5 stories, whilst the affordable housing share was going up from 35 to 50%. Some residents have done the math and came to the conclusion that the scheme could only be viable if there were significant Mayor of London grants believed to be around 170,000 per affordable unit. I think it's also worth noting that drawings indicate that half of the units for social rent will be single aspect, i.e. having windows only on one side because of the constraints of the site. I will conclude by saying that my biggest challenge when preparing my remarks for tonight's planning committee was trying to condense the vast range of objections raised by residents and other interested parties. I've only been able to cover a few in my remarks, but I know that as members of the PAC, you will all have received ahead of tonight's meeting extensive and well thought out communications from various residents group. I hope you read those in details and understand that residents' concerns go beyond just height. And I urge you to follow the advice of council officers and to recognise the scale of public opposition to this project and refuse consent for this planning application. The Glassmill is quite simply the wrong building for the wrong site.
Thank you, Councillor. As always, I've been very generous with the time, but don't worry about that. I will now ask the clerk to read the the comments from Councillor Lee and Councillor Coakley.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Chair and members of the committee, I want to make sure the concerns of people in St Mary's Ward are clearly heard, particularly those raised by the Friends of Battersea Riverside, as well as the Battersea Society, residents of Morgan's Walk, and many others from across our community in St Mary's and Battersea Park wards. I fully back residents' views and officers' recommendation to refuse this planning application. But beyond simply turning down this proposal, our residents think it's important to send a loud and clear message to developers. Schemes like this that ignore the local character and put profit ahead of improvements to the local area and people's well-being just aren't welcome here in Battersea. This is a very different application to the gas holders application that was recently approved by a committee. The gas holders application was in an abandoned, decontaminated site and had no nearby residential properties, so had no amenity impact on residents. For this application, the officers are right about the building being far too tall and out of scale under policy D9 of the London Plan. The truth is, a massive 29-storey tower here would cause real harm, not just locally, but also to the historic views from Battersea Park, the Thames Embankment and Battersea Square Conservation Area. That clearly breaches local plan policy LP3, which is there to protect our neighbourhood's character and heritage. Losing up to 70% daylight for nearby residents isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's devastating for people's quality of life and their health. This clearly breaches our local plan policies LP2, LP15 and LP27. Our community deserves homes that they can live in comfortably, not spaces overshadowed by towering developments. Residents have also made clear their concerns about flooding and climate impacts that the Environment Agency have also raised when it comes to managing flood risk, which is another potential breach of the National Planning Policy Framework and Wandsworth's own local plan policy LP12, as well as London Plan Policy SI12. Finally, it has been noted that many of the letters of support that have recently appeared on the planning portal don't seem to reflect what's been heard from residents in St Mary's Ward. Many responses appear heavily guided or scripted, repeating phrases like active frontage or building net zero that most residents just wouldn't naturally use. Other comments are also off topic or unrealistic. I'd strongly urge the committee to approach these letters of support with a healthy dose of scepticism and caution. We urge you tonight to refuse this application decisively. We will always support social housing, but our residents are going to be the ones that live through the impact of this development and its construction. For this to be worth it, the overall good from the application needs to justify the harm and, in this case, it falls well short.
Thank you, thank you. Now we'll hear the officers' comments on the application, and it's a very large application, so it's...
Did they have any questions for Councillor?
I beg your pardon. I am doing badly tonight, aren't I? Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for... you can't hardly ask questions of Councillor Lee and Colkey, but do you have any questions? Councillor Owens.
Just a question for Councillor de la Sajol, if that's all right. Thank you for your excellent summary of the objections. And obviously we've seen on the portal the extensive number of letters of support, items of support. But I was just wondering, what would be an acceptable level of height for your residents? Because last time in committee, it may not be one for Councillor de la Sajol, but last time in committee we did discuss it, and I wondered if it was something that you'd come across in talking to residents.
Well, can we clarify that? Has any resident said, I don't think we can ask Councillor Sajul to make up a view about what they might think. So has any resident said what might be acceptable?
I have been in touch with residents, to the Friends of Battersea Riverside, who have been campaigning heavily against this, and did ask them the question because I noticed the question was asked at the last committee meeting, so I wanted to be prepared if it came up again this time. And the answer I got was, well, if you look at some of the nearby buildings, they're all around 10-storey high, and that would be more commensurate with the local area from that perspective.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Okay, thank you. Oh, Councillor Humphreys and Councillor White, was that as well? Yeah, Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Guy Humphreys, Opposition Speaker on this committee and a councillor for Southfields in Putney. Councillor D'Souza, thank you for your comments. I just wanted to, Councillor Belton referred to it earlier, but there's been a lot of discussion one way and another about the level of consultation and how that consultation's been impacting the decision we're going to make tonight. As Councillor Belson said, we're not swayed by numbers. It's not a numbers game and it's not a referendum. But can you give us an indication from what you've spoken to residents how they feel somewhat misled by that consultation and how that's impacted on their feelings about the proposal, perhaps?
I think a number of people feel like the consultation may not, the documents may not have been presented in the most honest manner, in the clearest manner. I think there's concerns in terms of how the letters of support were actually gathered. I think you all got an excellent analysis put together by the Friends of Battersea Riverside, showing some doubt in terms of those letters of support, looked heavily guided, scripted, and don't tally with my experience on the doorstep of speaking to local residents where there's no objection to that scheme. So yes, I think the answer to your question is there is a feeling that the other side hasn't played fair and square in terms of how they approached communications with local residents.
Councillor White.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Sajul.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, my name isn't Councillor Sajul. My name's Councillor White, and I represent Tooting Bec Ward. So, yeah, I was just wondering that a lot of the positive comments, and obviously you've spoken about that some of them might not have been from people, but was there any sense that you got from the people that you spoke to that there was a feeling of, because this is 50% social rent homes, so did you get any feeling that people were hostile to the social rent homes?
No, I don't think that is the objection that people have to this scheme. And actually, someone was telling me, look, if you look at the Surrey Lane estate, there's some new social housing going there. Someone was saying, well, that's a nice block. Why do we not put that instead of this massive tower block? I think the vast majority of people I spoke to had no objections with social housing per se at all. And coming back to your earlier comments, my understanding in terms of how those letters of support were received is the question was asked, do you support affordable housing, without giving the context of the actual scheme. And that's why they got so many letters, because in principle, most people would agree that we need more affordable housing.
Thank you. That was questions. Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Granger, you're going to give us your recommendations.
A few moments later.
Officers have arrived at the conclusion that harm has been identified and the application be refused, subject to referral at stage 2 to the JLAs. Pardon. The proposal, to recap, by reason of its excessive height and scale with an established local spatial character that is predominantly low-rise, whilst also being located within a low-rise policy zone, would represent an unacceptable and incongruous transformative change within the location that would significantly harm the spatial character of the same location. The significant harm identified has not been outweighed by material considerations that indicate otherwise. And then we go back to repeating the same policies, D9 of the London Plan, PM9 and LP4 of Wandsworth's local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Granger. I want to, I think, perhaps start the discussion by just challenging one thing that occurs to me, and I'll certainly open it to everyone else in just a minute, but just to get the debate started. I think many locals would say, regardless of whether the buildings in another place might be attractive, or regardless of all those issues, regardless of whether it's ecologically sound, as it is right here, what it would do to the transport and traffic implications are horrendous. I mean, I'm not saying that for myself, I just know that's a view that many would share. Could I ask Mr. Tiddley to give a view, Mr. Tiddley, who will introduce himself in a moment, give a view about how the road system could handle by either the construction or the actuality of a building being there.
Thank you, Chair. David Tiddley, the Head of Transport Strategy. I think there are probably two things to deal with here. One would be the transport implications of development, and then the other issue is how development might be constructed. So taking the first one first, clearly the current usage as an office premises generates travel, and the assessment that's been made is to compare that with what the proposed development would generate, and that assessment, in our view, results in an increase in the numbers of trips that would be made, but not an increase that would sort of materially impact on the local highway or public transport network. This is a development that is primarily has a low car parking with it. It's principally a residential-led mixed-use development, and most of the journeys would be by public transport and by sustainable travel modes. As part of the application as well, the application has been referred to Transport for London, who are the strategic transport authority for London, of course. Plus, they also have responsibility for the immediate road of Battersea Bridge Road and Battersea Bridge, and they've also indicated they have no objections to on transport and highway grounds. Also, I suppose one other thing that has come up in previous meetings, there has been discussions about servicing and deliveries and deliveroos and that sort of more fluid activity that we get now in areas. And this development does provide sort of some ground floor circulation and auxiliary space. It does provide a degree of parking space that does provide that sort of level of flexibility that would, in our view, allow the development to proceed in transport and highway terms. I think also, having looked at quite a lot of the comments, that there are fewer concerns, in relative terms anyway, fewer concerns about the long-term traffic and transport issues of the development, and that there is a greater level of concern about the construction methodology and how this development would be built. Just to start with, clearly at the moment, Battersea Bridge Road is a red route. It is intended for the movement of high volume strategic transport and heavy goods vehicles. There is currently no restriction on the numbers of vehicles that could drive up and down the road, and in fact, Battersea Bridge as well carries hundreds of buses a day over it. So again, on those grounds, and following discussions with Transport for London, we have no particular reason to assume that a development could not be constructed near the highway here, or that the highway would provide any particular constraints. And in fact, there are tall buildings that have been located in quite constrained sites next to roads and rivers and bridges elsewhere. That said, there would quite clearly be a need for a condition on the application for a construction management plan that would be required prior to various stages of any development should members approve the application. There are also quite a lot of other regulations that would come into play that are related or outside the planning system. So, for example, the construction design and management regulations, highway regulations and highway restrictions and permissions that would be needed, everything from parking suspensions to hoarding licenses to cranes, abnormal load movements, environmental regulations, and even things that were during construction, so rules about building at height and things like that. All those are really dealt with in another place. Although, again, we have no reason to believe that it wouldn't be physically possible to build a construction here. And again, there would also need to be appropriate structural testing of the river walk and the bridges, as might be required by a highway authority or by Transport for London at the appropriate time. So I think with that, I'll finish, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Tiddley. Now, members, the issues are fairly clearly described, I think. Any particular comments? Anyone want to? Councillor Ayres.
I'd like to thank Nigel Granger for his...
Could you just say...
Sorry, I'm Fiona Ayres. I'm Labour councillor for East Putney. And I'm thanking Nigel for his long and carefully worded presentation. I think the problem with this is that it's not just too big. It's not just too tall. It's so enormous, it's almost a joke, this. I can hardly believe it's a serious application. When you showed those very clever photographs, it was the narrow view you showed always of the tower. In fact, it's quite a big footprint. I mean, if you look at it from the other angle, it would be even more imposing on those photographs, be even more dominant. And I'm particularly concerned that the shoulder building, which is a sort of architectural game where you step down from a tall building to a lower building, this so-called lower building is not 10 stories high. It's nearer to 12 from the south end, with the level falling like that. And that shoulder is presumably where all the local, the social rent goes. And on level 4, there are 6 flats with only single aspect and only 4 with dual aspect. And presumably that's the case of all of those 10 floors, which is really not acceptable use of a form of housing. I'm also concerned that the public housing promised is, as pointed out by Councillor de la Chazure, that it's not definite that we get it all, if any, because it's subject to viability. Is there anything in the conditions which limit the occupation of the market flats compared with the finishing of the council flats, as we discussed in a previous submission here? But really, I'm also concerned that there's so little public realm left. If you look at the size of the footprint on the size of the site, it's really just tiny little borders that are left. There's no expansive space on the river. That is quite tight, that space. Once you consider the changes of levels on that space between the building and the river, it's tight. It's all sort of ramps and steps and not generous at all. So I am totally against this building, and there's no minor changes that could be made to it to make it acceptable to me. Thank you.
Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Govindia, East Putney Ward Councillor. Mr Granger, a couple of questions about what you've just presented, and thank you very much for that. On the construction management plan, and there's very little about it in the paper given the conclusions of your report, but did the applicant offer the use of river for construction works? And if not, would it be something that you and your team would bear in mind when subsequent applications for this site comes? Because given the building, the site is right at the head of the bridge, creates a real challenge of how that construction is serviced and managed, and extensive use of the river might be the right way of trying to get over that problem. So that's one point. The other is about the community space, which I note is on 3 levels, which is quite for a community organisation. Sometimes, managing 3-level spaces is quite difficult. So I don't know whether they had an occupier in mind, and then whether that occupier was content with the way that internal space could be managed. Because it did seem to me that they're doing it because they have to do it, and they're doing it in the most grudging of ways, and providing something that ticks the box but doesn't necessarily make it a wholesome, workable community space. And third, probably a confirmation. As far as I'm aware, 6 Hester Road is social housing managed by Peabody, if I'm right. Is that the case? Because I thought that was the block which was probably most grossly impacted in terms of loss of outlook and sunlight daylight.
To answer your last question first, yes, it was the affordable block for the Albion Riverside. The community space, the report's a little bit cumbersome, I'm afraid, but there were 3 expressions. I'm going to have to thumb through this, but I do know at the same time that there were 3 expressions of interest obtained by the applicant in terms of potential occupiers for the community space, one of which was the Catherine Lowe settlement, and 2 others escape me for the time being because they're written down in this committee report that I'm flicking through. But there were 2. It's in a paragraph in here somewhere. I'll arrive at that area too. It's not so much the. I mean, if the expressions of interest from the community groups it wasn't necessarily focused as constant activity base. It was actually in order to it could be construed as sort of like a drop-in point to enable the community, but also enable sort of like administrative functions in order to deliver that community facility as well. So that's why the 3 levels could work in that regard. So obviously the lower levels are way more user-friendly, it's face-to-face, and then you could have, other functional administrative functions further up. But still, the fact is that it's all accessible. So, we think that the future success of that, a feature of this, had it been acceptable in other regards, which is repeated continually through the report, could have succeeded. The river usage, I've seen in sustainability documents and the whole life carbon cycle and circular economy statements, I have seen references to the river. I can't guarantee that was actually negotiated to a point where it was actually going to be secured, but I have seen references to it, and obviously based on that, we can take that forward and develop it if needed.
Can I suggest on the river, I mean, that sounds to me very attractive. However, there's low tide much of the time. The wharves required, You see, I think the viability issues are getting... Talking about viability, I'd also like to go back for a moment on the point Councillor Ayres made about the affordable housing. There's one very famous occasion in recent history where an application on Battersea Power Station caused some ruction when less affordable units were delivered than had been expected because they argued on viability. So Councillor Ayres was saying, what's the guarantee about the affordable element?
Hi.
Sorry, hello.
Yes, hi, Debbie Turner here. I'm the Principal Development Viability Officer for the Council. And in terms of viability, obviously, as they have proposed 50% affordable housing, they haven't been required to submit a full viability assessment as part of the application process. So that means that we haven't got that, essentially that line in the sand to consider going forwards. Obviously, if they had provided that, we could have a bit of an understanding if they were taking it forwards on a deficit position, for example. In the background, we have done a little bit of our own kind of high-level viability assessment, which kind of uses fairly standard assumptions, and that is showing that there is a bit of surplus in the scheme, but obviously there is the potential that they could argue that the toss on that, and certainly it would be very, very difficult for us if they were going to justify high costs, which we would expect on a complex site like this, especially with a building of this height. Obviously, with height comes a much higher build cost, as I'm sure you'd all be aware. But yes, I would certainly be concerned that they may come back in the future and reconsider the affordable housing, especially if it is 100% social rent. I wouldn't be surprised if that would almost be where they would start to consider these things. But certainly from the high-level viability assessment we've done, it is showing there is that, you know, it is viable at this point in time.
So to put that in very lay terms, which means that Mr. Moores here will shoot me down afterwards, but to put it in very lay terms, because the governance of this country hasn't asked for viability at this level, we're taking the gamble that it becomes that level and it works. And it's up to our decision tonight whether we believe it to a certain extent.
Exactly, yes. Yeah. We just haven't got that point at the moment that we can say there is a definite surplus or deficit on the basis of this specific application.
Was Mr. Calder desperate to say something there?
Only to say that, the application in front of you is to supply 50% affordable housing, 100% of which is social rent. So if they were to come back and change it, that would need a further application. So the one you're considering this evening is with the 50% affordable housing and 100% social rent.
That's the form of shooting me, only it's not Mr. Moores. Other comments? Councillor Justin. God, I'm good. You know who I mean.
Councillor Justin, 9
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask the officers, in considering this application, did they consider the proximity of this development to Battersea Heliport? I mean, I'm aware that single-engined craft must follow the river, but there is a precedent for a standalone tower, like at the Vauxhall end, commonly known as the Lipstick Building, which was involved with a collision with a pilot of 25 years' experience, showing what can happen in fog. And I'm thinking that this building here could in its proximity to the heliport, whether it was ever considered as one of the reasons, you know, that of the impact to have that there, because it's not, nothing's been said about it.
Mr. Granger?
Thank you, Chair. I think you'll find a heliport consultation with a response that there wasn't any comment from the heliport. But Having lived the experience of the Lombard Wharf next to Cremorne Bridge, rail bridge, I do actually know that the landing patterns for the use helicopters landing at the heliport is to track from west to east the River Thames, turn around by Cremorne Bridge and taxi and land into Cremorne Bridge, and that was obviously debated a few years ago, with leading counsel providing various opinions on whether Lombard Wharf would have an impact on that pattern of aviation. And it is not an accepted practice or an approach that the helicopters landing or using London Heliport use. They don't go far as the site location. So yes, we've considered it, and I also have experience of knowing how they land.
It does seem, unless someone's going to jump up and shoot me down at this point, as though actually the members' heart in this, not in the discussion about these kind of things, because they all agreed it would be quite a nice building in the right spot, and et cetera, et cetera. It's just the spot and the scale and height of it in the spot. Can we get on to, so I'm asking really, can we get on to essentially what the officer's recommendation is about the location of it and whether we think it's appropriate or whether we agree completely with the officer's recommendation? Comments? Councillor White, Councillor Govindia. Councillor White first. Councillor Humphreys third.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, given that the local and London plan states that we shouldn't be having high buildings in this area, this would represent a Trojan horse really for the area, such that this could be referenced then by other developers to build at a height that they would require. But it is ironic, I think, that this is the Battersea Riverfront is well known for developing or delivering mass housing, which is not affordable. Only 16% of that is affordable. So if this was built, it would stand out like a sore thumb, given that it would have 50% affordable housing. And I wonder whether there was any consideration of actually getting rid of the sore thumb and leaving the shoulder, which is only 12 stories, and having that at 50%.
Well, I think in the words that Mr. Calder will supply for me, we're here to decide on this application, not some mythical other application, which would...
I'm not suggesting that. Was that considered, was the question.
Was it considered? Okay, fair enough. Was it... Well, I've been around for a bit of time. As far as it's always been considered as a very... But Mr. Granger, you know absolutely...
Yeah, it started off it was taller. It's always been taller.
So it wasn't considered. Who did I say? Councillor Govindia.
Thank you, Chair. I probably am coming to my conclusion on this application. I've read through this, and I've read through a lot of the letters of support and objections. And I think the overwhelming message I get from that and the report is that this is just too tall a building in the wrong location, and the impact on and a whole range of heritage assets, both sides of the river, is just so enormous that any of the benefits that they might promise, which sound a bit like a pig in the poke at the moment, given the viability still being in abeyance, as it were, makes me come to the conclusion that the officers are right in their recommendation. I just in passing would say that there is certainly an issue here that the applicant, having paid an enormous sum of money for the site, is then recovering that expenditure or investment by jacking up the building. And I think it's right that the applicant shouldn't get the message that it is not for us and the local community to bear the negative side of their bad economic decisions. We shouldn't have to put up with the pain of a tall building just because they're paid too much. Applicants have known, because in fact this site has been one of those sites that I have been aware of when I was leader of the council. And it's always been known by previous owners and others that the site was not appropriate for a very tall building. And so if they're paid big money knowing that history, then it's their lookout, not for us to bail them out. I think my final point would be that I contrast this application and this report with the gaswork holders site, which we discussed last month. And it is unfortunate that that 29-story building, this 29-story building, got an entirely different treatment, whilst both of them failed to meet the planning policy requirements, and yet both promised to deliver 50% affordable housing. So we have to be very clear in our message to the development industry as to what do we mean and why do we want what we want. But as far as Mr. Calder's, each application on its merit and without comparing it with another one, I just say this, that it's important for us to give a right message not only to local residents but also to those who wish to develop in this borough, that they will get a fair crack of the whip, but they need to also play fair with us. I don't think there is anything I can say that anyone can say that would change my mind that this is a grossly unacceptable application.
Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to repeat a lot of what's been said already, but I too was going to draw a little bit of a parallel with what happened last month at the gas holder site, in the light that I was somewhat nervous coming into tonight's meeting because the comments from some colleagues last month was that we don't like this building. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but it's 50% affordable, so we'll say yes anyway. And again, it's that message that it sends out to developers. I know every site is on its own merits, but here we've given a lot more weight in the report to our local plan and the significance of that. And it's a different context, admittedly, but I think we have to be consistent in our approach, and that message should go out just as strongly to the developers as it does to residents, that we have local plans, a relatively new local plan, 2023, and it's there for a reason. We should uphold the standards that we've set out in that, what we think are appropriate for the borough. Otherwise, it isn't altogether surprising when developers come up with a proposal like this, which is so extraordinary, out of context, because they think our local plan doesn't evidently mean much. Mr. Grange has done a very good job of explaining, thank you for that, how we have to balance all these different aspects in the summing up and the decision that we make. And the public, just wanted to make a quick comment about the public benefits as well for the developer side, and it's been alluded to a little bit by colleagues tonight, that it strikes me as being a little bit tick box exercise. So we need this height, but we need a bit of public realm. Tick, we've done a bit of that, as Councillor Ayres said. I think the efforts on a very constrained site, it's hard, but they could have done better if it wasn't such a greedy footprint on the site, the overscaling of the building, the shadowing of the public realm, a lot of that public realm still not being very accessible with the change of use and stuff like that. And it's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy to do that, but it's like, yes, we've done a bit of public realm. We've heard there's constraints with the community space. A big open community space would be much more accessible to the whole community rather than little bits. Fine, as Mr. Granger says, they can use it for admin. We'd like to see the public using it rather than it being for admin purposes and things like that. So I think, yes, I'd like the developers to be a little bit more conscious that we want those public benefits, if they really want to get success with an application, to be much more significant and much more easily readable by the community as genuine public benefits, rather than just, we've done this, we've done that, we've ticked the box. We need more than ticking box. We want good, high-quality facilities that the community can use in conjunction with the affordable and decent housing for everybody in the borough. So yes, I won't be supporting the application, and it's very out of context, but I think we can go away and do better.
Councillor Abs.
Yes, briefly, just to say I associate myself with the comments from other members of the committee that they are not happy with this proposal. I just wanted to, because it come up, I just wanted to comment on the gasworks site that a colleague commented to me that the context couldn't be more different now. This development is right next to, as opposed to the gasworks development, right next to existing buildings directly affecting residents. And whilst we welcome a good attempt at providing more affordable housing, the benefits just aren't enough to outweigh the significant height of the tower. And I'd absolutely think that's right. I actually went and spoke to many of the would-be neighbours of the site a couple of weeks ago, and there was very, very strong opposition to the block, which I heard from them. And I understand their concerns. I was particularly shocked with the view from Battersea Bridge, which I think is overwhelming. Thank you.
Can I, Councillor White?
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to make a comment as well about the difference between the two sites. The gas holder site, the developer could reference lots of different buildings that are really, really high in that area. We are talking here about an area where that is not the case at all. In fact, you have to go a long way along the river to get built buildings of this size. And I don't know. One of the buildings that fill the skyline is St Mary's Church, and I think it's a very, very different area in comparison to the gas holders. So let's not get mixed up by that.
I was going to say, I will say it anyway. Having sat on this committee one way or another for quite a long time, the comparison between this that's just been made between this and the gasworks site, given the gasworks site area was developed very largely when you know who was in control and was planning applications chair, and to make that a comparison with an area which for a mile or so on both sides, the Chelsea riverfront and the Battersea riverfront, is actually relatively unchanged. It seems wild, and particularly given that I, in my ward, have a site that's been boarded up for 20 years, where a 23-storey block was given permission on Battersea Park Road, and I didn't fancy that either. So I really think we've been trying to be very non-party, and I just think that was a little over the top, frankly. But having said that, I hear no one supporting this application from whichever position. So, in fact, I think it's all summed up very well indeed in the officer's report around paragraph 20, 43 to about 47. And if any members of the public don't want to read 150 pages of report, and I can well understand that, if they look on the website tonight at page 129, they'll see the basis of what the recommendation is. So the recommendation is that we turn this down on the grounds that are given in the paper, that is excessive height and scale within an established local spatial character that are predominantly low rise while also being located. And with due respect to Mr. Granger, I won't carry on reading it because I think people get the general drift of what's saying. Is that approved? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. That I should say, of course, that there are several options. We have turned this down, but there are several options that are now open to the developer. They have 6 months to appeal if they wish to, and it's possible that the mayor and the GLA will call the application in as well. So this is not necessarily the end of the process.